you go to the wind tunnel because it's not something you can just look at, that it's way more than just frontal area. It's about like dirty air and how the wind flows.
Okay.
Which is something that's super hard to see. But yeah, it's, in a nutshell, if you're going to try to fit your own TT position without going to the wind tunnel, because obviously that's a huge investment that for most people is just not the smart thing to do, is kind of trying to streamline yourself and just, generally something that looks smooth and looks fast is probably going to be decent.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Brendan Housler with Evoke Bike. Got a special guest, Owen Cole. He's an Evoke bike coach and a ripper on Team Winston-Salem who just won Stage 2 at Redlands. And we're going to talk about some simple training that applies to your event. Because you might be thinking, Brendan, I'm not doing a stage race. I'm not going to race at the level that Owen's racing at. We do talk about the race, but we talk about different sessions that he used. And you'll see, I show his entire calendar for the 2 months before the race. It is very simply laid out. And whether you have a job, whether you are like Owen and still in school, I forget that he's still an undergrad. He's 20 years old. I'm like, are you in grad school or no? I lose touch with the exact age of these U23 guys. And we talk about everything from the TT. We talk about dropping volume and raising intensity. And what would you do that if you were maybe riding 12 hours a week or 10 hours a week? What does he do for the rest and taper? He has some really mega long rides. That's the one thing that might not be applicable to everybody. But if you're a gravel racer, you're going to listen to why he does these, because you're probably doing some really long weekend rides. And then he's got some 6x10s, some 8x10s, and you're like, are these tempo? Are these sweet spot? Are you doing this on the TT bike? What are these? So I think there's a lot of pearls in here that you can address or put forward to your own training and racing, whether you're an adult with a full-time job, whether you're a college student like Owen trying to race your bike and hit the biggest races in the country, or if you're a masters racer who just loves training, still loves racing, still getting after it. This is kind of a podcast for everybody. So Owen, thanks so much for your time. Everybody, let us know what you think of the podcast in the comments, and we'll talk to you soon. See ya. All right, everybody, welcome to the Evoke Bike Podcast. Special guest, Owen Cole, Evoke coach. And if you've been watching the cycling news, you saw a huge result at Redlands for Owen. And I'd asked him, hey, man, would you want to come on and just chat about what you did before the race? And obviously it's not just 2 blocks of training beforehand that made these magical performances come true. It's the full big picture that I'm sure Owen can talk about in more detail. But what can you do for your events coming up, even if you're not riding at Owen's level? What are maybe the 8 weeks beforehand, or we'll see what Owen really kind of cooked up. And Owen, yeah, welcome back to the podcast. Appreciate you coming on and chat about this.
Yeah, thanks. Excited to get into it.
Let's just, I'll clip out some images from your calendar after you talk through them. So, I mean, this better than anyone looking just at the workouts and things like that. What was so we're recording this for people that don't know, maybe they see it late. The race was the very first weekend of April, was it?
Yeah, it was either the first or second week of April.
Okay. Yeah, I'm scrolling down here. April. Yeah. 9th through the 13th. So this was probably a huge target, I'm guessing, or when did you start saying, hey, Redlands is a target? And then what were the actual goals in the stage race for you in Winston-Salem?
Yeah, this was the biggest target of the spring, really, until nationals at the beginning of May. Since November, obviously, we didn't have full confirmation that we were going until a little bit closer to the event, but we were pretty sure we'd be going. And yeah, it's the biggest race of the spring by far. So super focused on that, training a lot, really specifically for that, both the time trial and just kind of what those stages are. Yeah, we went in as a team, definitely going for stages. And then we're going to try to see, where that put us on GC and stuff at the end. But the goal was really just to try to get a stage win.
For people not familiar with Redlands, can you give a real quick overview as how you guys saw the stages? I'm sure there's crit, couple road races, but what were the features, or what were you guys saying, hey, we need to be good for X, Y, and Z on stage 3 because of whatever?
Yeah, there's so much different stuff. And really, you could win a stage in so many different manners. You could do it tactically. You could just do it with brute force. It's changed a little bit over how the race has been over, historically. I think it may be the longest running stage race in the US. Don't quote me on that, but um, it opens up with like a 20-minute time trial that's pretty technical around the lake, and then stage two is a like super long but somewhat gradual high altitude summit finish, and then stage three is like a shorter circuit race with a punchy climb and like a short little gravel sector that ended up being actually rather inconsequential. And then stage four is the crit, and stage five is like the iconic sunset loop, which is one of the longer stages of the race, and it's just 12 laps of this like neighborhood sunset circuit that has got a pretty proper little hill in it, and you just kind of wear everyone out because it's the end of the week. So pretty punchy race, but also like just pretty hard stages, like nothing like you might see in like a world tour stage race like the Tour, or even the 7-day races where you've got like these 200K flat sprint stages where a early break goes and everyone just kind of sits in and chills all day. These stages were like racing all day. There was no real time to rest. It was either break formation on some early circuits or just a short stage, and everyone was going full gas the whole time. So really just hard racing. We just wanted to be prepared to race hard.
So that'll be the first question then. Do you look at this as, hey, I've got to be able to sprint, I've got to have a good VO2, I've got to be able to make it over this climb slash little hill on Sunset Loop, pretty much try and be good at everything? Or were there certain things that jumped out maybe when you're talking about the time trial, like, damn, I really need to be riding the TT bike a lot? Or how do you balance this? Because there's just like an amateur listening is like, dude, I don't even know where to start.
Yeah, I mean, I race it a lot, or trained for it a lot, like I do for all my races. I try to just be good and capable at everything. I don't want to like, no, I only have this one stage I'm suited to win or something like that. I spent a good amount of time on my time trial bike. I did a lot of endurance volume. I did a lot of VO2 work, or some VO2 work. I did a couple races going in that are just going to tune you up in general. I think that's one of my kind of favorite ways to do that, is just ride a lot of zone two, and then a couple key workouts and some races to get that race speed in you. And yeah, I think being generally fit is more important than anything, because you have no idea how the tactics are going to go down. And so, you may be thinking on this summit finish that you're just going to kind of sit in and then attack with 5K to go. But what happens when it goes like it did, and I went in and attacked 40 miles from the finish. Like, if you just generally fit, whatever, you can make whatever situation work. I think that's the best way to train for events like this.
I love what you just said, because it is, I think as athletes, we sometimes want to hyper focus on like quote unquote event specific training. But yeah, the attack might go way earlier than you're expecting.
Yeah.
And if you were waiting for this, 20-minute climb and you're going 40 miles out or 40K, whatever you said, it's like, yeah, it's just a totally different ball game. So that's a really great gem in itself for people to hear. Let's talk us through going back then. So if it was the beginning of April, maybe like the beginning of February, did you start getting sort of keyed in on this from general training, or you tell me?
Yeah, like November, December, January, I would say, and even a good bit into February, I really just focus on endurance miles, low cadence work, not at super high intensity, just working on torque, and then gym work, and just spending time on the time trial bike as well. But really, for me, that period's just about training volume. I don't think you can stress that enough, how important that is. And then, yeah, once we got in closer into the race, I had a couple like local races I did with the collegiate team, and a couple crits with Winston-Salem that we did. And then just kind of up the intensity a bit, drop the volume a tiny bit. I found still pretty high volume, but I found like the kind of optimal range for me with school and everything else in my life, how much recovery time I have sitting at 24 hours in the week was pretty good. And I would usually do like two interval sessions, and then maybe like a moderate intensity group ride in there. And then other than that, it's just endurance miles and making sure you take your easy days. And I did two 4-week blocks of that in the like 2.5 months leading up to the race, and then made sure I had plenty of recovery in between those blocks and a nice rest and taper coming into the race. And yeah, I think just can't overcomplicate it. There's nothing crazy to it. There's no fancy science. You just got to be fast.
I love it. And it actually, can I share? I have never done this before on here. I'm going to see. Can I share your calendar?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Let me see if I can do this in here. Right. Training Peaks, share. Can you see that? Yeah.
Yeah.
This might record this way. Okay. So let's just scroll up a couple and we were talking January. So, oh, yeah. My first question, when you're on the TT bike and you're saying TT bike time, are you riding mostly endurance or are you doing specific like threshold intervals all the time on the TT bike getting time? How does that shake out? Or maybe both?
I do a little bit of a mix. Generally, when I'm going to do a TT bike interval session, I try to do like an endurance ride or an easy ride on it the day before, just so I'm not riding it for like the first time in a week or something
Mm-hmm.
and doing intervals. But then I'll do some sort of interval session. A lot of the races or a lot of like the standard workout would be like a 2x20 or something. But I
Mm-hmm.
also try to include some shorter efforts that are maybe not as hard of a workout, but maybe like 4 8-minute efforts where I'm really focusing on my form and my position
Okay.
and not really looking at the power meter and just trying to go hard and hold like a super aerodynamic position. So yeah, a little bit of a mix of different kind of things there.
How do you feel? That's a good tip. Do you just sense those from having ridden the TT bike a bunch? You just know when you're going fast on it, as opposed like some days you're just, maybe feeling sluggish, or it's kind of nice to hear that you're not staring at the power meter the whole time.
Yeah, it's actually I quite like to hide the power when I'm doing those TT bike rides because at least for me I have a decent drop in my power and that can get in your head a bit. So
Mm,
I like to just focus on just trying to go fast. I know what that feels like. I know what it looks like from a position perspective. So I really just try to focus on the high speed on those intervals because at the end of the day that's how you win a time trial.
And then I noticed you had some mega. I'm looking at one here, February 8th, a 7 hour ride, 163 miles. How
Yeah.
often do you go super mega? And is that just you love doing that, or do you feel like that really helps out the endurance fitness? Or tell me about that.
I think both. I love them. I've got I don't know. I probably did 20 or 36 plus hour rides
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
in the base season for this year. I really enjoy them. I mean I'm a huge fan of Zone 2 training. And so obviously those are a great way to stack that, especially being in school. I have a little bit less time during the week, and while I don't think you can make up for that on the weekend, I don't think if you're handling the fatigue right and your body's able to do it, you're getting enough sleep, you're doing the right nutrition, stretching, taking care of your body, all this stuff. I think it can be really helpful. And I mean, I found it really beneficial in my experience to do these super long rides. And often I'll have a group ride. It'll be like a Saturday ride, and I'll have a group ride in there and do some endurance after, and just really riding that endurance pace really smart, so that you aren't like over fatiguing yourself or anything, because 2 3 days after you could still be wrecked and you got to take 2 or 3 easy days. That's obviously not going to be beneficial. But if you're smart about the pace and you've got the plan dialed for the next couple of days and are really in tune with your body, I think they're really good.
What is a smart pace for endurance to you?
The very bottom of Zone 2.
Okay.
I like
Always, or if you have a shorter ride, would you ride harder, or what's your protocol overall?
I wouldn't necessarily say a shorter ride I ride harder. I think maybe in the earlier base season I'll just be in a little bit higher part of Zone 2, not because I'm trying to go harder, but because I have less fatigue doing like not as hard intervals the day before an endurance ride. You're just naturally going to go a bit harder to have that heart rate where you want it. Um, yeah, more or less, I ride super low Zone 2 all the time.
Okay. And then when you were talking about dropping the volume and raising the intensity a bit, talk through maybe an athlete that you're coaching that, say, their bigger weeks are like 12 to 14 hours. They're consistently doing 10, let's say. Where can you give a recommendation? Obviously, this is like a super general question, but if someone's hearing, oh, he found 24 hours, there's no way that's like not even in my realm. What would, and again, it kind of depends on the person, the athlete, and their event.
Yeah.
But How would you make a recommendation of dropping the volume and raising intensity? And I realize this is a tough question to answer.
Yeah, I think actually I may not even drop it that much. Some of the I coach quite a few guys who are in high school and race NICA, and we won't necessarily drop the volume that much when we're doing a bit higher intensity work because they never had the time to ride like do a huge volume base season, and they've just gotten super comfortable riding at that whatever 12-hour mark, and so they're super used to that now. And we can drop it just to like 10 or 11 with the intensity workouts, and that's no problem for them. They can handle that. But I think, yeah, like you said, it's really tough to answer generically because I try to stay in touch with these guys super frequently and really hear how they're feeling. And if I give them a week and it was just too much, we need to dial it off next time. Or if they really feel like they're not getting the training stimulus, they're not feeling fatigued, we'll try to dial it up.
Cool. People will have seen some 6x10s, some 8x10s. I couldn't tell exactly where those tempo, sweet spot, threshold. Talk us through some of those sessions and what's the point of those?
Yeah, those are I kind of like sort my base season, like, you can put it all under the umbrella of threshold training work into like two camps. There's those kind of 6x10 or 8x10, those 10-minute intervals I do that where I'll only take 3 minutes recovery in between, and they'll kind of start at like a mid high tempo and then work up to like the bottom at threshold at the end. And those are like kind of what I would describe as a more general fitness workout, like just trying to build TSS, if that's a way you could phrase that, just spending time pushing the pedals above endurance pace. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where I'm working on maybe more peak threshold power, where I'm doing a 3x20, but with a full like 10 or 15 minutes recovery in between.
Awesome. And then, okay, we touched on the long ride. Tell me about did you go to a wind tunnel? I saw a note there. Did
I
that
did. Yeah. I got the
get you
opportunity to go down to the A2 wind tunnel in Charlotte and do some testing on my time trial bike.
What were some of the pearls or wisdom that you learned from just being there?
Most of the stuff we learned was just picking equipment selection, skin suit selection, helmet, gloves, shoe covers, all that different stuff. We played a little bit with the position, but really what we learned was that the position that I naturally put myself in is pretty fast. Whenever people ask me or talk to people about it, the cool thing I like to talk about that was pretty interesting that we learned is I would always bury my head, kind of like in your forearms, just to try to super tuck in and be super arrow. And we found actually that was a good bit slower because my head would go so low, my back would become exposed. And so holding my head up a little bit more would protect my back is actually a bit faster, which is just a funny little anecdote I like to share with people from that
That is
testing.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the one that was probably the other than, obviously you can't tell which skin suit's going to be faster, but other stuff's pretty intuitive. That's the one thing that actually I didn't really think would be a thing beforehand.
So would that, for someone listening who's trying to dial in their own position, would looking from the side, you were thinking, okay, just get my head as low as possible, not really being able to see that your back was exposed. Is the thought then like make yourself from the side as wedged as possible? Like when you had your head too low, how do I do this? Like your back came up,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
just
like
be as
that.
compressed as possible overall? Or what are they kind of,
Yeah, it's so hard to say, and I don't want to say too much about it because I do think, kind of all the Instagram TT bike fit TT or Instagram wind tunnel scientists are a bit, it's like you go to the wind tunnel because it's not something you can just look at. That it's way more than just frontal area. It's about like dirty air and how the wind flows,
okay.
which is something that's super hard to see. But yeah, it's, in a nutshell, if you're going to try to fit your own TT position without going to the wind tunnel, because obviously that's a huge investment that for most people is just not the smart thing to do, um, is kind of trying to streamline yourself and just, generally something that looks smooth and looks fast is probably going to be decent. There's little
Mhm.
surprising gains here or there, but most of them are not huge numbers we're talking about.
And what is dirty air?
I'm not even that much of an expert on it, so I don't want to say too much about it.
Didn't mean to put
But
you on the spot.
yeah, there's just kind of blocking the air and then creating pockets behind it where air is like swirling back into and not just flowing off or behind you,
Mm.
is kind of the way I understand that, at least.
For not to blend podcasts, but for those who didn't get a chance to listen to the one with Brendan Rim um, and Zach Gregg, I was surprised to hear when they said, don't try to squeeze in the tightest uh, skin suit possible. You're no longer letting the fabric do its job
Yep.
of being aerodynamic. And I think that's one, I could be wrong. I think one of them we're talking about the wind and how it moves across your body at the point. Like you've totally messed it up at that point. I
Yeah.
was like, oh,
Zach
so all
is,
these years of everyone in the parking lot, like, let me just get in this thing.
because all this aero ribbing now, it's if you put on too tight of a skin suit, you lose all that ribbing. So it's no good. Zach has taught me quite a bit of what I know about time trialing. He's my go-to guy whenever I have a question about any of this stuff.
Super interesting. Zach, thank you for all your knowledge and sharing that with everybody. Then my last question about the 2 by 4 week blocks, you had mentioned the rest and taper, and how do you view a taper? And let's say for this stage race, but then also maybe for how would that change for athletes who are like, I'm not doing a 5 day stage race. I'm doing a 1 day event. How would that change?
I think, and for me and other people, like a 1 day or 2 days on a weekend makes it drastically less like important. I don't want to say important, but you don't need to stress out about it nearly as much. For this, I wanted to really make sure that because we're racing every day full gas for 5 days, that I really came into it properly rested, but also properly opened up, because we opened with a 20-minute time trial.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't really give you any time to settle into a stage or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, it was a tough balance, and we got our pollen season here in North Carolina right in the middle of that. So it kind of threw me off a bit. I would have actually been hoping to ride and push a little bit more in that second week there. Um, but yeah, it was trying to just cut the big volume down, and not stack as much fatigue day to day, but also make sure I was still getting enough intensity in to keep the body rolling.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, again, as you said, simple. It's like you finished 3 weeks before that Sunday. You were like negative 31 form, had done the last big 26-hour week overall, almost 1100 TSS. You went in, did the Wake Forest races after a rest week. And then you
Yeah.
were like pretty positive on form up until the first day. Beforehand, you do TT bike openers after a rest day. And everybody, you kind of saw the calendar before, and then it ends up being about like 12 hours of racing that week. So
Yeah.
um and then give we had one of the bullet point of like you had mentioned school and just how you suss out what you can manage with schoolwork, training, recovery. What's your way of managing all these other stresses besides the things that your power meter and heart rate monitor and whatever else you might be tracking pick up? Because you got to have that sleep and proper eating and stretching and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, this is like one of my favorite things to talk about with people, because I think it's just so undervalued. Everyone's like, not everyone but pro cyclists has got a job or work or people they got to take care of, or something else going on in their life that's just as or more important than training and riding a bike. Um, and it's really hard to measure the fatigue, and you get used to the day to day and you kind of learn how that makes you feel, but you have a big exam and you've been stressed in the library about it, and that for me is like a huge source of fatigue. That's so hard to put into any sort of numbers or anything. And so you probably saw it when the Training Peaks was up on the screen, but I have notes in there for all my midterm exams and all that kind of stuff, because I really tried to time those with either maybe not a full rest week, but a short period of rest. Um, Not even just from a time training perspective, but from the perspective of just being mentally sharp and ready to go, and also that training wouldn't be nearly as good when I'm stressed out about this big exam or something. And Yeah, it's something I spend a lot of time working on one-on-one with the guys I coach, because they've all got school and stuff to deal with, and you need to make sure that you're not spending every minute of your free time training, because you need to be getting relaxing before bed so you get quality sleep. You need to spend your time stretching. You need to make sure you're fueling and eating well. There's so many things that I don't want to say they're more important than the training itself, but there's no point in pushing the training to the limit if you're not going to do these other things, because you're just not going to get anything out of it. And unfortunately, all those other things don't show up on your Strava graph, but it's that's not what we train for at the end of the day. And I think just remembering that is super important.
I love that. That's really important. It's awesome to hear. And then for those that are into following pro cycling, tell us about the stage when you guys go in. This is stage 2. Well, and real quick, how the TT shake out? Where were you on GC? And then if you can share, like, what was the team's game plan? And then how did the day unfold on stage 2?
Yeah, I was eighth in the TT. I think just around 30 seconds back. Was personally looking for a little bit more that day, so I was a little bummed after the race, but I think I'm really proud of the way I kind of turned myself around mentally and refocused on the next day, which is super important in a stage race when you've got not even a full day to turn it around before the next race starts. So we came into that climb just, there's 10 circuits of about 5 miles there at the bottom, with some sprint points and stuff on it that people are going to try to get away in an early break on. And it was just super fast. I had a little bit of a run in with the ground on one of those circuits there at the beginning. There was a crash in a corner, and we took the corners pretty hot the first couple laps and then chilled out after this crash, but pretty hot through a corner. And a couple guys went down in front of me, and I was just about to come to a stop when a couple guys just came right up behind me and knocked me off my bike. So not a super big deal. Just gotta refocus for the rest of the day. And we went into the climb, and it was quite hot. Teammates were very helpful in mitigating that with ice socks and water bottles and all that stuff. In the race, we got to a bit of a tailwind section, and the race just kind of kicked off. This is a 40-mile climb, so I wasn't too keen to get it kicked off that early, like 5 miles into it, but it did, and I got in a group that started chasing down the early break, and we got up the road, and eventually, it kind of just whittles down, because, the last 10 miles of the climb are all over like 6, 7, 8,000 feet. So the race kind of just handles itself, and you just got to go all into the top and make sure you don't go over that limit. And luckily for me, I found that limit. I sat at it for long enough that I was able to get around everyone from that early break and make it up solo to the finish, which was, yeah, it was pretty cool.
That's that's amazing. How many guys were in the break chasing down the early break?
So the early break, I never actually got a number on it, but I think that was like 20 something guys.
Mm,
And then
dang.
it ended up being a group of, I mean, the Peloton was, when we went, was cut down to 15, maybe 20 guys. And then 4 of us got away and one more came up and joined us. So we had 5 for a while. And then I actually attacked out of it because we stopped working very well, and 2 of us got away. And then the 2 of us worked really well together and started catching other guys from the early break. So it was back up to 3 or 4. It's absolutely crazy. Luckily it was split up enough though that I could have my team car right behind me the whole time, so they could see what was going on. And when I was hypoxic, they were talking me through it in my ear. I knew what to do. So yeah, everything went great.
And then you're in are you in Winston-Salem most of the time, or over by Chapel Hill? Like, you're not at
Chapel Hill, yeah,
altitude.
yeah.
How did that did you just go
Just try not
and
to think about it. Really, I really, really hate racing at altitude. I've really, really suffered there in the past. I've had, I think, one good result in my life at altitude, but I've probably done 10 plus races up there. Um, yeah, I just tried not to think about it really, and not look at the power meter either, because that'll really get you down in the dumps.
Oh, that's smart. Okay. I like this,
I try
man.
not to I try not to look at it when I'm racing anyway, because power numbers don't win races. I think it's
Yeah.
important in training, but in the race, it's like, it's cool to look at after. That's about it for me.
What do you say to people who are like, oh, well, I need to look at it for pacing, or I need to look at it for whatever? What do you say?
My pacing, I could have been on a bad day and could have done 30 watts less, or I could have been on an amazing day and done 20 watts more. If I think pacing by the power meter will, I mean, it'll mess you up mentally for sure if you're even a small percentage off of where you're normally at. But
Mm.
I also think you can feel out of pace way better. You know, I could find the limit of where I could ride, and it wasn't a steady power number. You know, the gradient is not perfectly steady. You're not going to ride at a perfectly steady power to go the fastest you can. It's just power numbers don't win races. Yeah, that's like it's
Yeah,
just how it is.
that's a
Yeah,
climbing gem for people. James
yeah,
McCauley was talking about that. He's like, well, you like climbing these climbs. It's never just okay. Let me set it at 400. That's not
no,
the fastest way to climb. And people have this think time trial and they think steady power. That is not the fastest way.
no.
So, what about on the TT? Do you look at power then? Excuse me.
I actually can't even see my computer in the TT, so
You just arrow and
my
rip.
hands cover it. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I think also even just from a fastest climbing perspective, there's also just the perspective of where you're with other people. There's going to be attacks and whatnot, and I did this workout a couple times in there that I really like, and I actually think I found it from you originally, the 30-second 2-minute over unders,
Mm-hmm.
which is a workout I found actually was quite nice for, you know, race climbing, because you never sit at your 20-minute threshold power in a race, but a nice VO2 surge for 30 seconds and then settle in like high tempo ish for a couple minutes, and then repeating that for some 20-minute blocks is not only a proper hard workout, but I think it ended up being actually really good for that stage specifically.
That's awesome. That one can be sneaky. It's like, oh, it's only 30 seconds. And after a while of pushing the tempo on those, I'm like, damn, this is 30 seconds feels pretty
Yeah.
long. It's so funny. And tell me if you want me to cut this out. But I was thinking about you today because I was doing a different style with a longer hard start, like 4 minutes, 110% ish threshold, and then some over unders from there. And
Yeah.
then I was just getting really fatigued. I'm like, I'm going to switch it up to that one, just punch it and then sit back, punch it. I remember when you were like, when we first started chatting on Strava, and you were like, yeah, that's just like UAE workout. They like to make things complicated.
Oh
I'm
my
like, this is
gosh.
what it is. My thing is going to be like, it's this interval, then I'm changing to
Yeah.
this one. It's really just because I was gassed. And, but yeah, I now seeing how you train, that comment makes so much more sense because you are very keep it simple,
I just
train
yeah.
a little bit
Do a
of
little bit of
everything.
everything. You can there's different workouts you can do. They kind of all do the same thing, really. Just hit a variety of different stuff. Don't do the same workout too many times, and don't think about it too much.
So would you agree with this comment and the way I think for a lot of American racers, and this maybe would have been a caveat, but now that you've won Redlands with it, I sometimes say, well, the only asterisk to this is for people out west doing like big, mega, huge climbs um, that maybe that becomes more important for them. But I'd always look at like, okay, hey, athlete XYZ, when I'm talking to somebody, you know, we've got your VO2, we've got your ability to sprint, we've got can you handle surges? Can you hit a 30-minute or a 30-second climb and just not get shelled on that? Look at all the different little pieces of what a bike race could be. And then say, let's rank yourself like versus your peers. Maybe you're an 8 here. Maybe you're a 6 here. Maybe you're a 9 here. And then I look and say, hey, where are you like a 4?
Yeah.
We don't want that. We want,
Yep.
you don't have to be a 10, but you can't be a 4. Like you just don't want,
Absolutely.
would you agree with that kind of like just stepping back, looking for an all around like way for an athlete to kind of, uh, maybe not rank themselves, but just get a big picture. Like, hey, what are you missing? What's the hole in your armor?
No, yeah, but rank yourself relative to yourself. I think that's what we were talking about earlier. Is just you've kind of got to do a little bit of everything and be prepared for races to go any sort of way. You can't think a race is going to go a certain way and you're going to train only for that specific power number and think you're going to win the race that way. And yeah, I think it's good. I think, you know, definitely you want to be nice and even across the board, but I think there are certain characteristics that are just like more important than others. If you're doing any sort of long race, you need to do some long volume, high volume rides. You need to be comfortably able to ride that long just so that your body can handle the energy sources and manage your energy. for a ride like that, and you're used to being able to fuel for that. And then the other one is just like, yeah, that short punch, like you're talking about. There's just, you can't race without it because you need to surge out of corners. You need to close short gaps, do it when you're fatigued, do it when you're fresh. There's no getting away without having that short little kick.
Sick. Dude, thanks for coming on and talking about this. Anything that we missed or that I didn't ask you about?
I don't think so. I think this was everything we talked about.
All right. If
Yeah.
anybody needs help getting faster, hit him up, Owen at Evoke.bike. I'm Brendan at Evoke.bike. Good luck with your training and racing. Owen, thanks again. We'll have to do another pod soon, and we'll talk to you guys all later.